Welcome back to the second part of the France 24 debate. If you're just joining us, I'm Annette Young, filling in for François Picard. Now, here in France, it's la rentrée, the return in English, as in return to work, return to school after the long summer break. It's also the time when the French president addresses the troops, or more to the point, the French diplomatic and international diplomatic corps, as he outlines the diplomatic roadmap for the months ahead. But we're asking, in this time of geopolitical rebalancing, is France still a force to be reckoned with on the global stage? Now, here to discuss this with me is Jacques Millard, a parliamentary member of the French opposition party Les Républicains. Also, Yves Bertoncini, the director of the Jacques Delors Institute. A frequent guest here, also Dominique Tricon, the former head of the French military mission at the UN. And by Skype, we're hoping to speak to Christophe Premat, a parliamentary Socialist member. Thank you all to you for joining me here. Let's talk now about some of the conflicts that President Hollande discussed in his address. Jacques, to begin with, Syria. And did he actually hint at any way of offering a resolution on what is clearly a very messy scenario?
To be messy, this is messy. And I would say that, the ally of the day is not the ally of the next day. And things are changing. When you see how Turkey is behaving, I'm astonished, because Turkey has been pouring fire in Syria, arms, etc. And they had one aim. That means to tumble the regime and to install, a pro-Turk regime in Damascus. And I think that today we see the limits. It has been a civil war, there is no doubt. But it is more than that. Today is a war by proxy, because, everyone is intervening there. And it's very difficult now to, restore peace, because you have also those foreign fighters coming from all over the place. And I think it will take time to restore peace, especially because the Kurds issue is now at stake. It is at stake in Syria. It is at stake in Iraq. It may be at stake one day or the others in Iran. So it's a very, chaotic situation. But I regret that France took the position that it took from the beginning on. And today, I'm sorry to say that we don't play a role in this chaos. And even wonder if United States is able to play a role.
And Dominic, following up on that, can France indeed play a role?
No, I don't think so. France is only present because it's important due to terrorist attack in France and to show to the French people that we are part of the fight against terrorists. But we are really playing a second role in this environment. What is interesting in the last week is that Turkey, initially for years, has played an indirect role in the crisis, and now is playing a direct role with the Turkish army really in Syria and fighting not only Daesh, of course, but also the Kurds. And then we've got this, we see the difficult position of the US, because the US are supporting Turkey and are supporting the Kurds. And so they need to be in between and stop each other or fighting each other. And I'm pretty sure that the people who have a benefit from that is Daesh.
Yves, in terms of the Syria policy by the Hollande government, there does appear to be somewhat of a change in recent months, where there is a sort of unspoken recognition of the fact that President Assad will have to remain in place in some form or fashion.
Yes, maybe a bit more realpolitik. But I want to underline that in 2013, when France wanted to strike Assad, maybe for moral reasons, because he had used chemical weapons, it could have been useful to follow him. And I mean the Brits and the Americans, because at that time Daesh was not that present in Syria. And the fact that we did not block what could have been blocked at that time is painful now. So we are facing as French the consequences of what has happened in Syria, because Daesh has played a role in sending terrorists, killing our youth, our people here in Paris, everywhere in France, including in Europe. So the question now is that we, as French, have an agenda, also a national agenda, and I fully share what Jacques Millard has said. The problem with Syria is that all external actors have their own agenda. In this, it's a regional game, if not a world game. And it's true for France, for Syria, for Russia. So France is one of the actors with a very specific agenda, which is to fight against Daesh, terrorism, not only in Syria, but also in Iraq. François Hollande also tried to promote a settlement, a peace settlement. He said that what has been launched in Geneva should go on. But the problem for this is not only to have a goodwill of Assad and his opponents in Syria, but also the goodwill of the others. And what is striking to me is that the Syrian conflict is a national political resource for people like Mr. Erdogan, for people like Mr. Putin, for people in Iran, I'm afraid. And though it's all the more complicated to make people trying to forge a settlement when they have really their national agenda, but also their personal interest in terms of their, the stability and the strength of their regime.
At this point, I want to bring in our guest, Christophe Premat. I understand that you want to respond to what Yves has just been saying.
Yes, of course. I think it's correct to date back to 3 years ago, actually, in August 2013, because it's there that the Syrian policy of President Hollande was conducted. And as you say, there was this report about the use of chemical weapons in Syria, and then President Hollande decided to get an impulse in that struggle. But of course, President Obama and the U.S. they didn't want to follow that path. And we have met many times in the National Assembly, so people from the Syrian opposition, they were already so they said to us that we had to react in a very quick way. Otherwise, other groups would get involved in the area, and that's the problem with Islamic State. But it's not only the Islamic State; you have also other radical groups that are present in Syria. So that's a very hard situation. I think there is a regional game and a global game, of course, but I think that we need to have a dialogue and a very diplomatic dialogue with Turkey and Russia, because if we don't have the force, if we play a second role, then we have the diplomacy, and I think that's very important, and especially for matters in Middle East. And I remember that the President de Gaulle said that we don't fly to the Middle East with simple ideas, but I think that we have to get back to this kind of diplomatic game in order maybe to find the right path. And I think that France didn't have the same policy in terms of Syria. You remember that President Assad was welcomed by President Sarkozy the 14th of July 2008, and so on. So you had different signs, and I think we need to make this position more accurate. But I regret that we didn't have any partners with us in 2013 when it was time to act, because now it's really hard to see a quick solution to that conflict.
Jacques, you have something to say?
Yeah, I would like to stress something very important. The question of the chemical attack back to 2013, please be careful. We have no proof that the chemical weapon has been used by the regime. And there are many people who believe that it has been also used by the rebels. So please, this is not black and white. It's a completely confused situation in which we need to have a more balance. You don't only have the naughty regime and the good rebels. This is not true. On both sides, they have been making atrocities. So please be careful. What I regret is that the former government, when we cut off diplomatic relation with the regime, was a mistake. Because even if you are not agreeing with this regime, you must maintain links to find a peaceful solution. And the former foreign minister, Mr. Fabius, he wanted to. There was a kind of focus on saying, we don't want of this man. He should not be on earth. He said, even Fabius, that Al-Nusra, which is linked to Al-Qaeda, was doing a good job there. So we made big mistakes in Syria, and now it will be very difficult to come back.
At this point, we need to move on to the other issues that President Hollande addressed. And while he might be a deeply unpopular president here in France, there's one part of the world that he still holds some sway, and that is Europe. And the French leader made it very clear that he wants the European Union to end talks with the States on forging a sweeping trade deal that it sees as being way too friendly to American businesses. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
La négociation s'est enlisée.
The negotiations are bogged down, and positions have not been respected. Faced with such an imbalance, we must be lucid about what is happening. France would rather see things as they are, and not harbour any illusions about finding an agreement before the end of the American president's term.
President Hollande says France is going to ask the European Commission next month to halt these talks. Do you think this trade deal is now dead in the water?
Well, not that far, indeed. For both reasons that the USA are reluctant since from the start, and now that many Europeans are reluctant as well. I think the French have always been more or less interested by this TTIP. But there were at least two other major actors, the Germans, well, leading in trade issues. And in fact, the support for TTIP in Germany is extremely low now, very, very, very low, including because the NSA spied Angela Merkel and the others. Well, and there was also another actor, which was the UK. And the UK could have pushed for the TTIP. But now that the UK made the decision to leave the EU, of course, it creates a vacuum, I would say. And then the power relation as regards TTIP is not at all in favor of a conclusion. But I want to stress that it's on both sides, because I don't believe that Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Trump would like to conclude such a trade deal. So yes, the negotiation could go on a bit, but I don't see it going to a positive conclusion in the medium run.
Christophe, just to bring you in, as I said earlier, President Hollande is seen here in France as a very unpopular person, but he's also seen as a rather crucial figure on the European stage. How much sway do you think he actually has at the moment?
Well, I think the question of popularity, I think that no president is very popular when the economic situation is not stabilized, or when there is not sufficient growth. That's the first point. Then I think in Europe he has a very interesting position. I think it was very intelligent to tackle the European policies in this way, because you have now two things. You have the refusal of the transatlantic trade, which is very important. The TTIP is not a good thing. It's very hard, even for us MPs. So we need to have a specific ritual in order to consult the text, and I think it's not transparent at all. So that's the first point. And then you see that there is a crossroads between what happens with the TTIP and the Brexit issue, which is not really clear, as Theresa May came first to Germany and then to France in July, and her agenda was not the same as the one of President Hollande. But I think he will govern until the last day, because he knows that we need to have this position. We cannot have a president in campaign right now, because you have so many issues. You have all the issues are connected to each other in Europe, because you have, of course, the TTIP, you have the negotiation of the Brexit, you have the question of refugees, and you have what happens in the east part of Europe, and so on. So I think that's we are aware that we have to redefine the European project right now, and it's time to do that. Otherwise, maybe we have to reduce it, or to find another issue for that, and that would be a nightmare scenario to have this Brexit in 3 or 4 years. As first, you cannot have more than 2 years when you start with the Article 50 of the treaty. But the question is that the British government has to be in position to use this article right now. So you have a lot of signers. We need to have a strong president until the end, and I think he fulfills these positions, even though he's not popular. But I think that's not the question right now. So he was elected to govern 5 years, and he has to govern 5 years.
Jacques, as we said earlier, we're leading into a presidential election. If Les Républicains, your party, which is on the centre-right of the political spectrum, wins, what's their position on the TTIP deal?
I think it will be very difficult to implement such a non-agreement. First of all, I would to recall that a few months ago, all national parliaments of the EU met in Paris, and there was strong opposition to this TTIP for many reasons. Because, of course, of the norms, because of the so-called, protection of agricultural products in France, appellation d'origine, this label, and also because of this necessity to have arbitration clause, which I believe among two nations which are civilized, if I say, quote unquote, there is no necessity to go to private arbitration. And there is another point, very important. Will this agreement be approved by the Congress by a special majority to bind the United States, federal states? Because we are not so sure, You can have in United States an agreement which is reached by the federal government, but if it is not implemented, it's not ratified by a special majority in the Congress, then the Alabama, New York State, whatever, will not implement it. So we have a big problem on this question, and this is why we were very reluctant. And last point. This kind of treaties is more or less a kind of theoretical practice. I explain myself. World trade normally is growing every year by 7%, you see? 7% growth in world trade. And in fact, whether you have such treaties or not. So I think this is more or less a useless exercise.
Okay, now the other key issue with the presidential speech was, of course, Brexit, where the president made it clear that he wants Britain to leave or exit the EU by 2019. Dominic, what does that mean for France? I mean, is this a case of where, as Yves referred to earlier, that there possibly is a vacuum that's been created and that France can step in and step up to the plate and fill that vacuum?
Yes, may I jump just on the matter of defense, because we are talking about threats all around the world, so we need to talk about defense. And for a very long time, UK was really a difficult partner in the EU in the matter of defense. It was very difficult to talk about defense with Britain inside EU. But funny enough, France has very strong links with the British in order to organize defense. Lancaster House Treaty is a very interesting treaty where you've got forces, French and British forces, together, able to sort out crises in the world. So on one side, UK was difficult for the EU defense. On the other side, we've got very strong links with the British on defense. So I think that EU will work more comfortably on defense with the other partner. But on the other side, France know that the only one who are able to intervene with them are the British. So it's an interesting position.
Jacques, I just want to come back to you because in relation to that, Nicolas Sarkozy, who's declared his candidacy for the Republicans, has called for border controls for migrants to be shifted back to the Brits. That basically he wants to demolish the jungle refugee camp in Calais.
Well, everyone wants to demolish that, but it's a name which hasn't been really reached by anybody.
But he wants to also revisit the deal that he came up with in 2003, where it was the British, or it is the British, who process these migrants.
It's very simple. It's a failure of Schengen, because normally in a clear and working Schengen agreement, those people should not have come to France. They should have been stopped before and sent more or less to their own countries. So I think that, in fact, it shows, and this is the main issue for the coming years in Europe and in the world, it shows that if we have to define with all nations in Europe a clear refugee policy which doesn't exist today. Schengen has collapsed. you know, even if there are good things in Schengen, but it's not working properly. And so I think that we will be obliged, we will be to rebuild something to control. And I think this is a question of message, you see, because in fact, you know, I was in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia when Madame Merkel announced that she was taking 800,000. It is a catastrophic. It functions as an appeal, you see. So I think we should say very clearly, you don't come, and then we will take measure to prevent people to come. And we should help them, of course, to stay in their own countries, because the challenge is there also. Coming back to defense, because I would like to say something. Britain has left the EU, but Britain has not left Europe. That's the difference. That's the difference. And I'm pretty sure that we French, we need to keep good relations with Britain because we have a commercial surpluses. You know, it's a good commercial partner. So we are not going to kill ourselves because they left, this chaotic EU.
Eve, very quickly, do you have something to say in regards to that?
Yeah, in fact, you've mentioned TTIP, you see the EU as a threat in France. If you look at Syria or Daesh, you could see EU as an answer to the threat. And I think it is a turning point for the EU. There will be a divorce with the UK, of course. There's an interest in keeping good relations with the UK. Of course, even not being member of the EU, they could still go on cooperating with the Europeans as regards defense. They were not member of Schengen, but they were cooperating a lot as regards police and justice cooperation. So this will go on. But now it's all about France, not only France, Germany and all the others to get more united, because as Cameron said, we're stronger together. And the challenge for us, Europeans, we're only 6% of the world population without the Brits, 6%. We're even not able to shape our neighborhood. We are only trying to adapt to what is happening in our neighborhood. So there is a common challenge François Hollande insisted on, be a bit more united, to be a bit more able to live in a more peaceful environment.
I'm afraid, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there because it's time now for Media Watch. And it's time now for Media Watch, and for that I'm joined here in the studio by James Creedon. And James, you've been looking at the buzz surrounding the resignation of the French Economy Minister Emmanuel Macron, who of course might go ahead and launch a rival bid for the presidency.
That's right, it's the top story on French news websites today, Annette, and it's being picked up overseas as well. He's being dubbed young and rebellious. The one-time protégé of François Hollande fuels rumours he will launch his own bid for the presidency. That's how it's being summed up by The Guardian. Meanwhile, Le Point and other French media are going for more intriguing psychological readings of things. The son is no longer afraid to kill the father. So looking into sort of Freudian psychology there, if you like. But what they're saying here is that François Hollande may himself have been ready to distance himself from Emmanuel Macron. There were quite a few scandals in recent times. Notably, he had to pay back taxes on wealth tax, which is pretty embarrassing for an economy minister, even if the figure itself was quite low. It was only something less than 10,000 euros, relatively speaking low, I mean. In any case, they're looking here at whether or not Macron decided to go for it, so to speak, because otherwise François Hollande would have distanced himself anyway. Of course, we know that he has launched his own political movement known as En Marche from April of last year, or moving on, if you like, or marching onward. So he was already casting himself as an autonomous political force, somebody to be reckoned with within the Socialist Party. In any case, lots of comment on social media, some even referring to him as Brutus, saying that this is essentially stabbing his mentor in the back. Of course, he did work for over 2 years as an advisor at the Élysée Palace before being parachuted into the economy ministry by François Hollande. So many see this really as quite the betrayal of his mentor.
He's certainly raised eyebrows, hasn't he, on a number of occasions in recent months, even going as far to say that he's not a socialist at a recent rally. I mean, and he's sort of putting himself forward as a sort of fresh alternative.
That's right. In fact, as somebody who was at the heart of defining and designing policy in the Hollande government, it's interesting for him to then come along and say, as he did at a recent rally, in fact, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not socialist at all. It has been fodder for cartoonists, as we can see here, Emmanuel Macron depicted on the left saying, I am not socialist. François Hollande saying, well, we kind of knew that. And, well, we're not either. That's Francois Hollande and Manuel Valls reading the right-leaning newspaper Le Figaro. In fact, of course, it has been one of the major criticisms of Francois Hollande's government by a Socialist Party faithful, if you like, that a lot of the policies, a lot of the reforms are not necessarily very socialist in nature at all. What else do we have? Of course, it has already been announced that Michel Sapin, the finance minister, is to step into that breach and to, I suppose, just fill the gap at Bercy, where the economy ministry and the finance ministry are located. But if he is indeed to go ahead with an independent bid for the presidency, a lot of questions surrounding that as well. Certainly his past as a financier at Rothschild's, as somebody who went through the prestigious school ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration, he is going to have difficulty, I suppose, carving out an image for himself as somebody who was within the Socialist Party confines, but is now also casting himself as a reformer. Some people wondering just how he is going to be able to, if I can find the tweet in question, how he's going to be able to launch a rival bid. Is it going to be within the Socialist Party as another candidate for in the Socialist Party primaries?
It's certainly not clear, is it?
It's going to be very difficult for him to do that, having said openly he's not a socialist. But it will be complicated also to mount a rival bid against Hollande, because he would have to get 500 signatures from local representatives around the country, and that's not guaranteed.
James Creedon, thank you so much for that. And that's it.
Star.
Thank you. And thank you, Jacques Mian. Thank you to Dominic and Eve, and also Christophe for being part of the France 24 debate. Do stay with us here on France 24. We've got more news and headlines coming up very shortly.